Ralph Yates, 2024. I don't have a photo of Ralph Yates, so this will have to do. The earliest FBI report we have of an interview with Ralph Yates is this one, dated 11/27/63, 5 days after the assassination. Ralph Leon Yates, 13564 Brook Green, Dallas, Texas, voluntarily appeared at the Dallas FBI office, accompanied by his uncle, Mr. J.O. Smith, 13770 Sprucewood, Dallas, Texas, and furnished the following information. Yates stated that he is employed as a refrigeration serviceman for the Texas Butcher Supply Company, Dallas, Texas, and in connection with this employment was driving a pickup truck on R.L. Thornton Expressway at approximately 10:30 a.m. on either November 20th or 21st, 1963. He stated he noticed a man hitchhiking at approximately the Beckley Street entrance to the R.L. Thornton Expressway, and he had stopped and picked up this man. Yates said after seeing photographs and television pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald, he is of the opinion that this man was identical with Oswald. He continued that when the man walked up to get into the pickup truck, he was carrying a package wrapped in brown wrapping paper about 4 feet to 4.5 feet long. He said he told this man he could put the package in the back of the truck, but the man said that the package contained curtain rods and he would carry it with him in the cab of the truck. Yates stated as they drove along, the man had asked him if he knew a certain party whose name Yates cannot recall now, and he had indicated to this man that he did not. He said the man then asked if he had ever been to the Carousel Club, and Yates had replied that he had serviced refrigerators in the past in a number of clubs and that possibly he had been to this one, but he did not recall. Yates said that he had said to the man that there was going to be a lot of excitement in Dallas soon, referring to the president's visit, and the man had asked Yates what he meant. He said he replied that the president was coming to Dallas, but that he personally felt that the president should not come in view of the Adlai Stevenson incident which had occurred previously. Yates stated the man then asked Yates if he thought a person could assassinate the president. Yates replied that he guessed such a thing could be possible. The man then asked Yates if it could be done from the top of a building or out of a window high up, and Yates said he guessed this was possible if one had a good rifle with a scope and was a good shot. Yates advised this time the man pulled out a picture which showed a man with a rifle and asked Yates if he thought the president could be killed with a gun like that. Yates said he was driving and did not look at the picture, but indicated to the man that he guessed so. Yates said that the man then asked if he knew the president's route for the parade in Dallas, and Yates replied that he did not know the route, but that it had been in the paper. He said the man then said that he had misunderstood him and that actually he had asked Yates if he thought that the president would change his route. Yates said he replied that he doubted it unless they might for safety reasons. He said as they approached downtown Dallas, the man indicated that he was going on Houston Street and that although he was going to Irving, he told the man he would drive off the expressway and to Houston Street and let him out there, then would go back on the expressway. Yates said that he went off the expressway on Commerce Street, turned off Commerce on Houston, drove north on Houston, and let the man off on the corner of Elm and Houston streets. He said he saw the man cross Elm Street, but does not know where he went from there. He said that as the man got out of the truck, he recalled him saying something about the triple underpass, but cannot recall exactly what was said. Yates stated that the man he thought was identical with Lee Harvey Oswald, whom he had picked up, was a white male, approximately 5'9" tall, slender with dark eyebrows and hair. He could furnish no additional identifying data. Yates stated he is married and has 5 children, and that he would appreciate not receiving any type of publicity from the fact that he was furnishing this information. And that's the first statement, or the FBI report of the first statement made by Ralph Yates. And then on the day after the FBI first talked to Yates, they went to his place of employment and talked to a co-worker of Yates, a Dempsey Jones. And this is the report of that witness interview. Dempsey Jones, Route 4, Box 376, Dallas, Texas. Telephone number has been employed by the Texas Butchers Supply Company, TBSC, at 2038 Commerce Street in Dallas, Texas, for 9.5 years. He said he has known Ralph Leon Yates as a fellow employee for a little over a year. He said Yates is a big talker who always talks a lot of foolishness. Jones recalled that he and Yates were working in the shop on the second floor of the TBSC about 11 or 11:30 a.m. one morning, and Yates had returned from a call earlier that he had made at Irving and Oak Cliff before returning to the TBSC. Jones said Yates told him he had picked up a boy in Oak Cliff and taken this boy to Houston and Elms in Dallas. Yates said that this boy had a package not described at that time, but after the death of the president, Yates described the package as a long package, and then on telling the facts over again, Yates said this man told him it was some window shades he was carrying for the company the man had made. Jones said that Yates told him on the first date that the man discussed the fact with him that one could be in a building and shoot the president as he, the president, passed by. He said Yates did not discuss this man the day before the president was shot in any great detail, but after the president was shot, Yates told him he believed that the man he had in the pickup was the man who shot and killed the president, and he was going to call it in and tell them what he knew about it. Jones was unable to describe what agency Yates was talking about. He said he recalled that Yates mentioned calling them on November 26, 1963. He said no other person was present when Yates discussed these matters with him in the shop. He described Yates as a white male in his 20s, about 5'4", 160 pounds, stocky build, hair brown, eyes believed gray, and is employed as a refrigerator mechanic with the TBSC. Jones said that the company officials should have a record of the time that Yates made the call to Irving, Texas. Now I want to go over a few points in this document. The first one, in the first sentence, underlined in blue. Of course, the FBI wants this in there. They want Dempsey Jones saying that Yates always talks a lot of foolishness. That's in the first sentence. Now another point here, when recalling the morning that Yates gave Oswald a ride, Jones describes it as one morning, so he doesn't give a specific day for it. And then Jones says Yates told him he had picked up a boy in Oak Cliff and taken this boy to Houston and Elm. This was said, when you read the context here, this was said before the assassination. So the shills will like to say that Yates just made this all up after the assassination. Well, the fact is that Dempsey Jones, even if he thinks Yates is always talking foolishness, admits that Yates told him some of the story, at least, before the assassination, when Yates would have had no reason to think it was anything important. So, he said he picked up this person in Oak Cliff and gave him a ride, and that this guy had a package not described at that time. So, for some reason, apparently, Yates did tell Jones before the assassination that he had given this person a ride and this person had a package. Now, I don't know if he would have said that about somebody who was not suspicious or didn't have a big, long package or not. There's no way to know that. But apparently, Yates thought this was worth mentioning to his co-worker. And then a little further down, Jones said that Yates told him on the first date, that means before the assassination, that the man discussed the fact with him that one could be in a building and shoot the president as he, the president, passed by. So these are the things that Dempsey Jones says that Yates told him prior to the assassination. So the Shills can't claim that Yates just made up this thing completely, because he did tell his co-worker prior to the assassination some of the details. For whatever reason, Ralph Yates apparently decided to make a statement to the FBI on December 10th, 1963. This is not simply an interview. This is a statement either dictated or typed by Ralph Yates, probably dictated, in which he speaks in the first person and is being quoted. This is very unusual for FBI interviews. Usually the FBI states things in their own words as to what the witness said. But this is Ralph Yates, for some reason, apparently feeling the need to be quoted. And I speculate that Ralph Yates, for some reason, did not trust the FBI to report what he said, or these FBI agents to report what he said. But, of course, that's speculation. But this is very atypical, and it does point out an issue which I will get to. I, Ralph Leon Yates, make the following statement voluntarily to C. Ray Hall, who has identified himself to me as a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. No threats or promises have been made to me to get me to make this statement. I have been told that I do not have to make a statement, that I have a right to talk with a lawyer before making any statement, and that this statement may be used against me in a court of law. I was born at Dallas, Texas on January 23, 1936, and went to the 9th grade in school. I am now working as a refrigeration serviceman for the Texas Butcher Supply Company at 2038 Commerce in Dallas, Texas, and live at 13564 Brook Green in Dallas. On a date that I now believe was Wednesday, November 20th, 1963, I had been to Charlie Jordan's Meat Market in Oak Cliff and was driving on the R.L. Thornton Expressway on my way to the Parkett Market on Shady Grove Road in Irving, Texas. I noticed a man hitchhiking near the Beckley Street entrance to the expressway and stopped and picked up this man. When this man walked up to get into the pickup truck, he was carrying a package wrapped in brown wrapping paper about 4 feet to 4.5 feet long. I told this man he could put the package in the back of the truck, but the man said that this package had curtain rods in it, and he would just carry it with him. Later drove along, this man asked me if I knew where the Carousel Club was or had ever been there. I told him that I had not been there and did not know where the Carousel Club was located. The man then asked me if I knew a Jack Rubenstein, and I said, "Who?" The man then said that Jack Rubenstein was more commonly known as Jack Ruby, and Ruby ran the Carousel Club. I then asked the man if Ruby ran Jack's branch office lounge on Industrial, and the man said that he didn't. I told the man that I had serviced refrigerators in a number of clubs in the past and had possibly been to the Carousel Club, but did not remember it. I mentioned to this man that there was going to be a lot of excitement in Dallas soon, and this man asked me what I meant. I told him the president was coming to Dallas, but I personally felt that the president should not come to Dallas because of the reception which Adlai Stevenson got not too long ago. This man then asked me if I thought a person could assassinate the president. I told him I guess such a thing could be possible. The man then asked me if it could be done from the top of a building or out a window, high up, and I told him I guess this was possible. Well, this would be possible if a man had a good rifle with a scope on it and was a good shot. This man then pulled a picture out of his pocket and showed it to me. This was a photograph of the man who was in the car with me, and it showed him holding a rifle in his right hand with the butt of the rifle resting on the ground. The photo showed the rifle to have a strap on it, but did not have a scope on the rifle. This photo also showed that the man had a pistol of some kind in a holster on his left side. After I looked at the picture, this man asked me if I thought the president could be killed with a gun like that one, and I told the man that I guessed so. This man then asked me if I knew the president's route for the parade in Dallas, and I told him I did not know the route, but it had been in the paper. The man then said I misunderstood him, and he had asked me if I thought the president would change his route. I told him that I doubted if he would change the route, unless they might for safety reasons. We were almost to downtown Dallas by this time, and I told the man that I was going to Irving and asked him where he was going. This man said he was going to Houston Street, so I told him I would turn off the expressway and let him off on Houston Street. I turned off at the Commerce Street exit, and when I got to Houston Street, turned left off of Commerce. I asked the man where he wanted off, and he said that anywhere along Houston Street would be all right. So I let him off at the corner of Elm and Houston Streets when I stopped there for a red light. The man got out of my truck and took his package with him. I turned left and went to Irving, and did not see which way the man went from where I let him out, except he walked across Elm Street going north on Houston. As the man got out of my truck, he said something about the triple underpass, but I didn't understand what he said. After I got back from Irving that same day, I told Dempsey Jones, a man that I work with, about the conversation I had with this man. After President Kennedy was assassinated, I saw pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald in the newspaper and on television. I remember seeing a full-page photograph on the front page of the Dallas newspaper that showed Lee Harvey Oswald just an instant before he was shot. I've been shown a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, and this photograph has a label, Dallas Police 54018 112363. This is a photograph of the man that I picked up and gave a ride to and had the conversation with, as set forth in this statement. And then, presumably in Ralph Yates' own handwriting, he says, I have read this statement, which is written on this and one other page, and it is true to the best of my knowledge, Ralph Yates. And it was witnessed by C. Ray Hall of the FBI and another FBI agent, last name White. So this is a formally signed statement by Ralph Yates. And now I'm going to go over some differences between the signed statement and the FBI report. In the FBI report, the FBI says that Yates told them that he picked up Oswald either on November 20th or November 21st, 1963. But in the signed statement, he says it was November 20th. This is important later on when Yates' story can be corroborated with other witnessed actions of Oswald. That is, Oswald was seen in Oak Cliff on November 20th at about the time that Yates picked him up. And I'll get to that. But anyway, that helps to corroborate the Yates story, that it was the 20th rather than the 21st. And in the next difference here, in the signed statement, Yates brings up the name of Jack Rubenstein and Jack Ruby. But in the FBI report, it says that Yates cannot now recall the name of this person being talked about. So in the FBI report, what it looks like to me is that probably Yates could recall the name when he first talked to the FBI, especially considering that Jack Ruby had shot Lee Harvey Oswald by then. But the FBI simply didn't put it in their report. This, I think, is consistent with other things I've seen where the FBI is, in my opinion, obviously covering up important facts. So in the signed statement, Ruby was mentioned in the conversation with Yates and Oswald, according to Yates. But in the FBI report, Yates can't remember the name Jack Ruby somehow. So this is the first indication here that the FBI is trying to make it look like Yates doesn't really know anything, when really Yates does. And the FBI is covering this up. They're covering up this Yates account, and these Yates documents were never provided to the Warren Commission either. I don't know when they first became public, but you can't find them now on a government website that I'm aware of, the archive site. I got these documents from the John Armstrong Archive, and he scanned them or photographed them at the National Archives. All right, in this example here, this comparison here, Yates is talking about apparently one of the backyard photos. This man then pulled a picture out of his pocket and showed it to me. This was a photograph of the man who was in the car with me, and it showed him holding a rifle in his right hand with the butt of the rifle resting on the ground. Now, this particular pose is not in one of the backyard photos we now have, but those backyard photos started showing up later. I mean, one was originally in the evidence, and then two more became known publicly. So it wouldn't be surprising if there was more than three total, even though we only have three that we know about for sure. And if the Yates story is true, he's talking about yet another backyard photo pose that we don't have. The photo showed the rifle to have a strap on it, but did not have a scope on the rifle. And you can't see a scope on the rifle in the backyard photos we do have, so that would be consistent with the backyard photos if there's another one we haven't seen. This photo also showed that the man had a pistol of some kind in a holster on his left side. After I looked at the picture, this man asked me if I thought the president could be killed with a gun like that one, and I told the man that I guess so. But in the FBI report, it says that Yates didn't even look at the photograph. So I think the FBI is hiding the fact that Yates did look at the photograph and describe something very much like one of the backyard photos and evidence. And so the FBI is covering up the assertion Yates makes that Oswald showed him a backyard photo. And the last difference here I'll cover is this. After I got back, this is from the statement, the signed statement. After I got back from Irving that same day, I told Dempsey Jones, a man I work with, about the conversation I had with this man. In the signed statement, Yates says that he told Dempsey Jones about the man on the same day he gave Oswald a ride. The FBI report does not mention this, but the FBI did go and interview Jones, and I've read that here already, the interview with Jones, the report of the interview with Jones. So he must have told them so, even though they did not write that in their report. So this is corroboration of the idea that the FBI isn't writing down everything that Yates says. In their report, they did not write down anything about Dempsey Jones. Yet he must have said something about Dempsey Jones because they went to interview Dempsey Jones on the day after they talked to Yates. So obviously, in this example of Dempsey Jones at least, and I think in the other examples I've covered, Yates has been saying things that the FBI has not been including in their report. And I think probably somehow Yates realized that, and that's why he wanted to make a signed statement. Something, as I said, which is very unusual for an FBI report, for an FBI interview. The FBI usually designs their reports to be hearsay reports. That is, they say in their own words, the FBI agent's words, what the witness says. And so apparently Yates felt the need to make a signed statement in his own words, and I think this corroborates the need for him to do so, because the FBI is not writing down exactly what he says. After Yates dictated his signed statement, and I've been reading from the copy he actually signed, after that the FBI did make a report dated for December 14th of the December 10th signed statement, and they accurately report that signed statement in this report. This is not the same report, of course, that I went over before. The first report did not apparently accurately reflect what Ralph Yates said, but they do reproduce his signed statement in this report here. And also in this December 14th document, the FBI provides a description of Ralph Yates, and that will become important later in the video, particularly this part about a 2-inch burn scar running from left corner of mouth upward on left cheek. So this is in the December 14th report that includes Ralph Yates' signed statement, where the FBI gives information about Ralph Yates, including a physical description. Now, I want to go over this FBI document because it pertains to the date on which Yates gave Oswald a ride. This is a November 28th FBI report, 1963. J.R. Gilpin, partner, Texas Butchers Supply Company, Dallas, advised that Ralph Yates, one of his employees, came to him on November 26th, 1963, and asked him if it was possible to confirm the date that he, Mr. Gilpin, had ordered or called Yates to go to Irving, Texas on a service call to the Park Market Drive-In Grocery at 2320 Shady Grove Road at Story Road in Irving, Texas. So this is saying that Gates's boss, or Yates's boss, is telling the FBI that Yates came in to ask this. And notice that what's being referred to here is the trip to the Park Market in Irving, which according to Yates's story, he went to after he dropped Oswald off at the Texas School Book Depository building. What would be more relevant, I think, would be when Yates went to the call in Oak Cliff, because that's where he picked up Oswald. So he must have gone to the call in Oak Cliff on the same day that he gave Oswald a ride, whereas it is possible that he is confused about where he went after he gave Oswald a ride. And that wouldn't be as directly connected, because he picked up Oswald in Oak Cliff, so he had to be in Oak Cliff when he gave Oswald a ride. And so the Oak Cliff call should be what's being asked about here. But according to this FBI report, Yates's boss said that Yates asked him about the Irving job. Continuing with this document, Mr. Gilpin said he located a record dated November 21, 1963, and to the Arlington food stores, which presumably is the Park Market, though it doesn't say that explicitly. This bill was in the amount of $12, which would indicate that it was a 2-hour service call. He said he recalled that he gave the order to Ralph Yates about 10:30 a.m. at the TBSC office, and he told Yates at the time that he would call him at the time he was at the Park Market to find out what the trouble was they were having. He said that he recalled he made a telephone call around noon to Yates and determined that the compressor at the Park Market was out of oil and not burned up. So Yates replaced the oil and should have returned to the TBSC about 12:30 or 1 p.m. He said Yates was rechecking the time of the call on November 27, 1963, and that he, Gilpin, had discussed the matter with Sam Owens, his partner, who recalled that Yates had called in from Irving, Texas, sometime after 11:30 a.m. on the morning of November 21st, 1963. He said that he knew of no reason that Yates might have had for being in Oak Cliff on that morning. He had no other information which would further establish the time that Yates made the service call. So what concerns me here is that they're not pursuing the 20th at all. That is, if the FBI really wants to know what happened, they would ask, where was Yates sent on the 20th? And I think Yates was sent to the Oak Cliff job on the 20th. I don't know about this Park Market, whether Yates has that confused or whether this is disinformation here. But a real investigation would focus on the day that Yates was sent to Oak Cliff, because Oak Cliff is where he picked up Oswald. So this is really beside the point. The real point would be, what day was he sent to Oak Cliff? And they never determined that. In fact, in this document, Gilpin seems to be saying that Yates was not sent to Oak Cliff on the 21st. And so the FBI, if they know their ass from their elbow, would be asking, where was he sent on the 20th? Since that's the date, or since in the original FBI report it says that Yates wasn't sure whether it was the 20th or the 21st. And as I said, they focus only on the 21st, even though apparently he was not sent to Oak Cliff on the 21st. So the question that demands to be asked here is, where did he work on the 20th? And of course the FBI doesn't ask that question. And the reason the FBI doesn't ask that question is because they already know it was the 20th. And so they don't want to investigate the 20th, because that would confirm that Yates did give Oswald a ride. And now I'll go to this December 7th document of an interview, an FBI document of an interview with Mary Ada Dowling. Mary Ada Dowling advised she is currently employed at Skillern's Drugstore, number 41, Preston Road and Forest Lane. She advised that until recently she was employed with the Dobbs House at 1221 North Beckley Street in Oak Cliff, across the street from where Oswald lived, working during daytime hours. She said that she did not know who Lee Harvey Oswald was when she formerly waited on him when he ate breakfast in the morning, usually between 7 o'clock and 7 a.m., but that since Oswald has received so much publicity in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy on November 22, 1963, she became aware that he was the one who had been a customer at the Dobbs House. She recalled that Oswald was in the restaurant on Wednesday morning, November 20th, 1963, at about 10 a.m. And if you recall, Yates said he picked up Oswald in Oak Cliff at 10:30 a.m. So it looks like Oswald, before he got a ride with Yates, was at the Dobbs House having breakfast at 10 a.m. when he's supposed to be at work already, according to the official story. She said that Oswald was apparently in an ugly mood at the time and said something nasty to her using curse words regarding his order. She said she told him that if his order was not right, that the Dobbs House would make it right. She said that shortly thereafter Oswald again used some curse words in addressing her because she did not give him more coffee as soon as he thought she should. She recalled that Officer J.D. Tippit was in the Dobbs House at that time, apparently as a customer, and that when Tippit heard Oswald making his outburst toward her, Tippit shot a glance at Oswald. She said Oswald was already getting ready to leave, and nothing was said between Tippit and Oswald. She stated there was no indication that Tippit and Oswald ever knew each other. But this statement is a very indication that they did know each other. But that's not the topic I'm using it for here. She noted that she had known Officer Tippit for approximately 5 years because he had formerly come into the Continental bus station in downtown Dallas, in which bus station she worked in the drugstore. She said that Tippit was usually in the Dobbs House each morning about 10 a.m. or shortly thereafter to drink coffee. So I think this means that Oswald is there at this time because he knows Tippit's going to be there, and he's going to get a ride from Tippit, or he's going to get something from Tippit. Regarding Oswald, Miss Dowling said that she had not seen Oswald in the Dobbs House on Thursday or Friday, November 21st or 22nd, 1963, and she attributed it to the possibility that Oswald may have been angry with her because of their clash on November 20th, 1963. She recalled that sometime prior to their clash on November 20, Oswald had on one or two occasions asked her for her name, and she would not tell him her name. She's a smart girl. Miss Dowling stated that she had never, to her recollection, seen Jack Ruby prior to the time of the president's assassination on November 22, 1963, but she did recall that the night manager at the Dobbs House, Douglas Leake, had said after Jack Ruby shot Oswald that Ruby had been a customer of the Dobbs house during the night hours in the past. She said she had no information of association between Oswald and Ruby. So the fact that Dowling saw Oswald in the Dobbs house in Oak Cliff at 10:30 on November 22nd, or I should say on November 20th, corroborates the day as the 20th that Yates gave Oswald a ride from Oak Cliff. And I think that's too much of a coincidence to be mere coincidence, unless you think that Dowling and Yates are conspiring to defraud the authorities here, which I think would be a ridiculous thing to think. So I think this proves it. The fact that we have two witnesses who put Oswald in Oak Cliff at the same time, and one of them gave Oswald a ride to the Texas School Book Depository building with a 4 to 4.5 foot long package that Oswald said had curtain rods in it. I think that's a true story. And the Dowling account proves that the Yates account is true. That is, Yates did give Oswald a ride on November 20th, and presumably the rest of what he said was true also, because why would he lie? Now, what the shills will do is they will attack Dowling and Yates separately to challenge their credibility separately, but they will refuse to deal with the fact that their stories match up. That is, Oswald was seen by Dowling at 10 o'clock while he was eating breakfast, and then a half an hour later, Yates picked him up in Oak Cliff and gave him a ride. They refuse to deal with that coincidence, which is too perfect a match for it to be mere coincidence. It means that Oswald was there in Oak Cliff at 10 o'clock and 10:30, and that he ate breakfast at 10 o'clock, and Ralph Yates gave him a ride at 10:30. That's the only reasonable conclusion here. But the shills refuse to deal with that. They simply attack each witness individually, and their attacks sound credible because you can make them sound like questionable witnesses. But how can their times and days match up unless it's true? Unless you want to accuse them of being conspirators in some hoax plot. But, of course, the shills can't do that because that's more ridiculous than what they're criticizing. So they just refuse to deal with the fact that these are corroborating stories. So it's obviously true, in my opinion. It's obviously true that Ralph Yates gave Oswald a ride on November 20th. There's a lot of material in the FBI documents to say that Ralph Leon Yates was crazy. And I'm going to get to that later in the video, that aspect of this. But this is the first of those documents. It's January 10th FBI report. But at the moment, I'm just going to use it to address the issue of Barney T. White. Barney T. White, who is a great uncle or some kind of distant relative of Yates, is a printer. And White has done some printing work for Jack Ruby. All right, these two sentences here, or this one sentence. Yes, I can count up to one. This one sentence claims that apparently that Yates told the FBI that Barney T. Wyatt is a great uncle or some kind of distant relative and a printer, and that has done some printing work for Jack Ruby. And coincidentally, another printer by the name of Barney T. White appears in other FBI documents as a printer of Jack Ruby's. So one might suspect, if one is an investigator or if one is a carpet layer, that Barney T. Wyatt might actually be Barney T. White. But apparently, if you're in the FBI, that thought does not occur to you. And reading this FBI document, which reports of November 28th, 1963, so presumably the original report. This is some kind of a summary report, I guess. But the original report presumably was made on November 28th, 1963, which was before the January document, which talks about Barney T. Wyatt as Ralph Yates' printer relative. Reading that document here. At 1:55 p.m., November 28th, 1963, Lee Hall, attorney, advised Special Agent Joseph M. Myers that he was calling from his residence, Fleetwood, 14738, and his office is at 1100 Adolphus Towers, Riverside. He stated that a friend of his called him by the name of Jim Wanner, whose home phone is blah, 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 and told Hall that one of Wanner's employees, a female who was not identified, had overheard a printer at the Record Printer Company on Elm Street, Dallas, make a statement that approximately a week to 10 days prior to November 22nd, 1963, that Ruby and Oswald were in the printing shop together. The man that made this statement, according to Hall, is named Barney, and that he is the owner of the printing shop. Hall did not know whether Barney is the man's first or last name, but that Wanner told him that Barney does Ruby's printing for him, and that Barney hangs around the courthouse possibly because he prints a number of legal records. Hall stated that Wanner did not know what to do with the information, and that this was the reason for him calling Hall. The city directory reflects that Barney T. White was owner of the Record Printing Company, 2818 Elm Street, Dallas. On November 28, 1963, Barney T. White, telephone, advised Special Agent Robert E. Basham that he has never seen Lee Harvey Oswald before and does not know him. He advised that he has been doing printing work for Jack Ruby for about a year and a half, but he has never seen either of the two together and knows of no connection between the two. So Barney T. White is a printer. And not only has he done printing work for Jack Ruby, he is Jack Ruby's current printer at the time of the assassination. Barney T. White, W-H-I-T-E. So, of course, the Barney T. Wyatt mentioned in the Yates document is the same person as Barney T. White, and the FBI is misspelling his name in the Yates document so that you or anybody reading these documents won't connect the two. In the Yates document, they make it sound like Yates's relative did some printing work for Ruby at some time in his lifetime, when in fact Barney T. Wyatt, Barney T. White, who must be the same person, is Jack Ruby's current printer at the time of the assassination. So Ralph Yates has a current connection to Jack Ruby, in that his relative, whatever the relationship is, and the FBI blurs that as much as they can. You'd think they could determine precisely what the relationship is to Yates, but they don't do that. They can't even determine how the name is spelled here. They spell it W-Y-A-T-T instead of W-H-I-T-E. And apparently we're supposed to believe that Ralph Yates speaks with a southern drawl, and that the FBI agents here can't tell the difference between Wyatt and White. I assume that's what we're supposed to think. I don't know. We're supposed to think this is an innocent mistake, but the FBI can't get the spelling of somebody's name correct. And therefore the connection was not made. But, I mean, anybody who's investigating this, whether he has professional training as an investigator or not, should be suspicious that Barney T. Wyatt, a printer for Jack Ruby, is the same person as Barney T. White, a printer for Jack Ruby. But apparently the FBI is incapable of putting two and two together, and they keep them separate in their documents. So here, what the FBI is doing is hiding a relationship between Ralph Yates and Jack Ruby through the connection of Barney T. White by misspelling White's last name, and by not allowing investigators to connect two documents, which are obviously talking about the same person. And perhaps it is worth noting here that, to judge by the 1961 Dallas telephone directory, Barney T. White, at the time, worked for Burroughs Corporation, and of course Burroughs Corporation was a big defense contractor, coincidentally. And now I need to go over these Mary Lawrence documents from the FBI here. This is related to Yates, though the relation may not be clear until I get to the end of these documents. Anyway, this first one is dealing with a December 3rd phone call the FBI received from Mary Lawrence. And this is one of those summary sort of reports. I think they're compilation reports. Sometimes they report information from different original reports. I don't have the original report. This is all I have, all I could find about this incident. And this is the first, chronologically, the first Mary Lawrence document I have involving Mary Lawrence with the FBI or anybody else. At 1 p.m., December 3rd, 1963, Mary Lawrence, head waitress, B&B Restaurant, Oaklawn Avenue in Dallas, telephonically advised Special Agent J. Doyle Williams she had received an anonymous call from a male caller about 6 a.m. on December 3rd, 1963, who stated, "If you don't want to die, you better get out of town." Lawrence stated she has known Jack Ruby for the past 8 years and that she saw him at approximately midnight on November 22nd, 1963, after the president had been shot. And I underlined that to point out the timing issues presented by that sighting. That is, this is after the assassination, or during the early morning hours of November 23rd, 1963. So they make it explicit. Sometimes when someone's talking about midnight, they might have the date wrong. They might be saying it's midnight for one day when it was the day before or the day after, because the day changes at midnight, of course. But here it's made explicit. This is the wee hours of November 23rd, so this will be after the assassination. Ruby was at the B&B restaurant at that time and was with an individual, possibly identical with Lee Harvey Oswald. So if it was Lee Harvey Oswald, we know that something's wrong here. That is, if it's November 23rd, Lee Harvey Oswald is already under arrest at that time. And you would think the FBI would realize that. They are professional investigators. They should know that this would be impossible. And maybe that's why they put the time at when they did, on November 23rd, because this would be impossible. But anyway, that's what it says here. Ruby was at the B&B restaurant at that time and was with an individual possibly identical with Lee Harvey Oswald. Lawrence was upset because of the call she had received and stated that she felt the call may have resulted possibly because of her acquaintance with Jack Ruby. She stated she knew of no reason why a person should want to kill her, because her acquaintance with Ruby had been on a business basis based upon her employment as a waitress at various restaurants in Dallas. Lawrence stated her husband is Charlie Lawrence, who was employed by Yellow Transit Company in Dallas, and that she lives with her husband at this address. She stated her working hours were from 10:45 p.m. to 8 a.m. So this is an Oswald sighting that is impossible as stated here, because Oswald would have been under arrest at the time. And now I've got another FBI document here from 3 days later. Mary Lawrence, employed as a waitress, night shift, Lucas B&B restaurant, furnished the following information. She has been employed as lead waitress at the Lucas B&B restaurant, Dallas, for approximately 5 months each year during the past 8 years. During this period, she has known Jack Ruby as a customer at Lucas B&B restaurant. He would come into the restaurant several nights each week, usually during the early morning hours. She has seen Jack Ruby in the restaurant with a number of different people, both men and women. but she is not acquainted with, nor does she know the name of any of Ruby's associates. Lawrence is also acquainted with Ruby's sister, Eva Grant, who has been a customer frequently at B&B Restaurant during the past 8 years. On Friday, November 22nd, 1963, at approximately 1:30 a.m., now the FBI has the date before the assassination, on the morning of the assassination, a young man described as white, in his 20s, 5'7" to 9 inches, medium build, 140 pounds, dark hair, came into the restaurant and sat down at a table. When approached, stated he was waiting for Mr. Ruby, who would be in a few minutes. About 2:15 a.m., or 2:30 a.m., November 22nd, 1963, Jack Ruby came into the B&B restaurant, and after looking at the young man at the table, sat down at a table behind the cash register. He did not order his usual food, stating he didn't feel good, and ordered a large glass of orange juice. A few minutes later, the young man, who was seated at the table, went over to Ruby's table. Thereafter, Ruby paid the bill for both himself and the young man who had eaten. Mrs. Lawrence had never seen this young man in the restaurant before, nor had she ever seen him with Jack Ruby prior to this occasion. On November 22nd, 1963, after the assassination of President Kennedy and after the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald, Mrs. Lawrence saw Oswald on television and stated the photograph of Oswald on television appeared very similar to the young man who was with Jack Ruby in the B&B restaurant earlier on the morning of November 22nd, 1963. Subsequently, Mrs. Lawrence and Bobby, the cashier on the night shift at the B&B restaurant, discussed the young man who was with Ruby on the early morning of November 22nd, 1963, and they agreed that he appeared very similar to Lee Harvey Oswald. Note, they're not saying it definitely is Lee Harvey Oswald. Mrs. Lawrence was shown a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, and she stated the young man who was with Jack Ruby in the B&B restaurant on the early morning of November 22nd, 1963, was similar in description and appearance to Lee Harvey Oswald. She recalled, however, that the young man she had seen in the B&B restaurant had a small scar near his mouth, either on the right or left side. Mrs. Lawrence advised she has no knowledge of the activities of Jack Ruby other than her acquaintance with him as a customer at the B&B restaurant. She was not acquainted with Lee Harvey Oswald and had never seen him, to her knowledge, unless he could have been the man who was with Ruby on the morning of November 22nd, 1963. So this is not a positive identification of Lee Harvey Oswald meeting with Jack Ruby. And we know that Oswald did not have a scar on the right or left side of his face either. There was a little scar on his lip because of a fight he had as a teenager. Someone had punched him in the mouth, and one of his front teeth came through his lip. So, but that's clearly not what's being talked about here. It's not something you'd even notice, really, though you can see it in at least one photograph. But I don't think that's the scar that Mary Lawrence is talking about here. And note, the FBI can't pin it down whether it's on the left or right side. Now, that might not be their fault. It might be she doesn't remember. But it's worth noting here, because of another document, that they don't know which side of the face it is on, or that's what they say in their report, at least. Now, knuckleheads and shills will use this information to claim that this person with Jack Ruby was actually Larry Crawford. And one of the shills here, Vincent Bugliosi, from his tome, he's the guy who wrote the tome on the JFK assassination. The tome is useful for reference if you want to see how shills operate, but it's not a book to read if you want to understand the assassination. From his tome, he says, Mary Lawrence, a waitress at the Lucas B&B restaurant in Dallas, which was right next door to Jack Ruby's Vegas Club, said that at about 2:15 or 2:30 in the morning on the day of the assassination, she saw Ruby, whom she knew, having breakfast with a young man. From television and photographs looked very similar to Lee Harvey Oswald. She said the cashier at the B&B, Bobby, last name unknown, agreed with her on this. Of course, we know from Crawford himself that he had breakfast with Ruby at the B&B restaurant at the same time Lawrence saw Ruby with a man who looked like Oswald. This is not true. It was on a different morning, but I don't think it's worth my getting into here to prove that. But it was a different morning. It was not the morning of the assassination. Parenthetically, Lawrence said that the man with Ruby had a small scar near his mouth, either on the right or left side. In all the medical records on Oswald, there is no mention of his having a scar. Here, Bugliosi shows that he doesn't know as much as I do about Oswald's facial scars. But that's not surprising. He was a shill, and he didn't take this seriously, even though he spent an awful lot of time on it. So if anyone had a scar near his mouth, it had to be Crawford. That is not logic. That's bad logic. There are plenty of other people in the world who had scars near their mouths, so it didn't have to be Crawford. Although there is no reference to this in the Warren Commission volumes, so he's got no evidence, he's got no proof that Crawford had a scar. Photos of Crawford in volume 17 appear to show a small scar above and to the right of his mouth. Now this is what Bugliosi is talking about. Apparently a lot of knuckleheads who would never say they agree with Bugliosi agree with him on this point, because I've seen plenty of knuckleheads say that that was Crawford at the B&B restaurant. Now this looks like it's probably a pimple that Crawford had popped repeatedly or something like that. I suppose it could be a scar, but I don't think that's something that would stand out to a waitress at a restaurant as a scar worthy of remembering, because lots of people have spots like that on their faces. And I don't think it's worth my time to try to disprove this Crawford thing in this video. Maybe I'll make it a video about Crawford where I do that. But I think this is clearly not the person that Mary Lawrence is talking about. So I will waste no more time on it. And now we get to the definitive Mary Lawrence document from the Dallas Police Department, not from the FBI. And we really luck out with this one, I think, because this comes from the investigation for the Ruby trial. This is not about blaming Oswald for anything. So apparently the detectives here are not concentrating on the cover-up, because they're not trying to cover up the fact that Ruby shot Oswald. They're for that one. And here, they're not on the ball about being on the lookout for making sure Oswald is guilty. Either that, or they just don't know as much as the FBI does. They don't know what to cover up here. Subject was interviewed by the undersigned officers with the following results. Subject stated that on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, at approximately 2:15 a.m., a white male, 5 feet 7 inches tall, 140 pounds, with dark hair, entered the Lucas B&B Cafe, located at 3520 Oak Lawn, where subject is a waitress. Subject stated that this man was positively Lee Harvey Oswald. Subject said that this man stated that he was waiting for Jack Ruby. Subject stated that Jack Ruby entered the cafe a short time later, but did not sit in the booth with this man. The man believed to be Oswald went over and sat with Jack Ruby. Subject stated that Ruby and the man believed to be Oswald left at approximately 2:45 a.m. At this point in the interview, the subject stated that she could not be sure that this man was Oswald, but if he had a small, deep scar on his left cheek, it was him. Now, I view this as significant because this scar is something that the witness, Mary Lawrence, obviously views as unique. This is the positively identifying characteristic. The positively identifying characteristic. The defining characteristic of this young man she saw. That is that he had a small, deep scar on his left cheek. Very specific. This is months later, but somehow the FBI did not elicit that description of the young man. But the Dallas police did when they were investigating for the Ruby trial and had other things on their minds. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, the FBI provided a description of Ralph Yates when they interviewed him, or when they included his signed statement in one of their reports. And under scars and marks, they have a 2-inch burn scar running from left corner of mouth upward on left cheek. So the FBI thought that was a scar worth mentioning in a description of the witness. And Mary Lawrence, although we don't have a photograph of Ralph Yates or his scar, apparently is describing the same scar, a small deep scar on his left cheek. Well, it's a notable scar, and Ralph Yates has it on the left side of his mouth, just as Mary Lawrence said the man meeting with Jack Ruby had. Now, Mary Lawrence does say that this young man was about 5'7", and the FBI says Yates is 5'8". I think we can accept that as a match. Now, Mary Lawrence did say the young man weighed 140 pounds, and the FBI has him at 160 pounds, and Dempsey Jones also said he was 160 pounds. So he's 20 pounds heavier than the Mary Lawrence description. I think that's easy enough to accept. Some people aren't good at judging weights, and you might say a particular individual might be 20 pounds lighter than he used to be or something like that. But when you're judging an individual that you don't know, I don't think it's surprising that you might be 20 pounds off. And so I'm not bothered by her having the weight wrong. And her height is right on. Who knows if the FBI had the height right? And within an inch is pretty good. So I think of all the characters in the story, the Mary Lawrence description matches Ralph Yates better than anybody else. Better than Oswald, certainly, because Oswald was taller than 5'7", by all accounts. And Ralph Yates has a scar, which could be the same scar that Mary Lawrence saw, whereas Oswald and Crawford do not have such scars. So I'm seeing a pattern here. As I said before, the FBI tried to hide the fact that Yates said that Oswald had talked about Jack Ruby. The FBI tried to hide the fact that Yates' relative, Barney T. White, was Jack Ruby's printer at the time of the assassination. And now the FBI tried to hide the fact that Yates met with Jack Ruby at the B&B restaurant. I think this conclusion, the last one, is consistent with the other two. The FBI knows that Ralph Yates had some sort of relationship with Jack Ruby, and they're covering that up because it's important to understanding what really happened. So here's my explanation of the Yates episode. The conspiracy originally planned to incriminate Oswald with the Yates curtain rod story. But Oswald, who knew there was going to be an assassination, got sassy with Yates and overplayed his wink and nod routine by talking about the assassination. And there was more than one person who knew Oswald well who said that he liked to play with people's minds. Well, this was a way of playing with Yates's mind. And as far as Oswald knew, this was just some random guy picking him up. I think, giving him a ride. Yates got worried that the president might be in danger because of what Oswald said, and complained to his contact, Barney T. White, who set up the meeting with Ruby at the B&B restaurant. After talking with Yates, Ruby told his contact that Yates would not cooperate, and the plan was changed on the fly to incriminate Oswald with the package he brought in on Friday morning. Yates subsequently tried to reveal the plot in a way that he thought would not endanger himself or his family. And by that I mean he tried to let the FBI, he tried to give them a lead, that is Jack Ruby, hoping that he would not be, I think probably Ruby had threatened him when he had the meeting at the B&B, that Yates had to keep quiet or he and his family would be in danger. That's my speculation. And he didn't want to endanger his family, but he didn't want the president to be murdered either. And so, trusting the FBI, there was your mistake, Ralph. Trusting the FBI, he wanted to give them a lead to investigate. That is Jack Ruby. And I think, of course, the FBI was not trustworthy. They were on the side of the conspiracy. And I think Yates was trying to thread the needle here, but that he failed miserably. And Yates ended up dying in a nut house at age 39 of a heart attack, coincidentally. Now, getting back to the matter of the FBI investigation, after Yates made his December 10th, 1963 signed statement, the FBI in Dallas didn't do anything more to investigate the matter with Yates. In fact, apparently they didn't do a damn thing until they got this teletype from J. Edgar Hoover regarding several issues, but also the Yates issue. It says, through a re-interview of Yates' employer, J.R. Gilpin, an inquiry at Charlie Jordan's meat market immediately established whether or not Yates had service call at latter company on November 20 or 21 last. Thereafter, re-interview Yates with Polygraph, provided he furnishes written waiver of consent in effort to determine Yates' veracity with respect to his alleged conversation with individual identified by Yates as subject. And I have not found any subsequent interview with his employer, Gilpin. Maybe they did interview him, but I have not found the document. But they did follow up on the meat market, even though the meat market always has a different name when we see it, but presumably it's the same one. Charlie is usually part of the name. In the teletype here, it's called Charlie Jordan's Meat Market. And according to the subsequent FBI report, Yates refers to it as Charlie's Meat Market in Wynwood Shopping Center. Ralph Leon Yates, employee, Texas Butcher Supply Company, was re-interviewed, at which time he stated on or about November 20th or 21, 1963, his reason for going to Charlie's Meat Market in Wynwood Shopping Center was to pick up a small check which was payable to TBSC. He stated he did not perform any maintenance work on the equipment at Charlie's Meat Market, and that upon picking up the aforementioned check, he then proceeded to Irving, Texas, as he has previously advised. And then we have this on the same day. The FBI apparently talked to somebody at Charlie's Ranch Meat Market. Presumably this would be the same place that Yates is talking about. Thomas Ayers, employee, Charlie's Ranch Meat Market, 249 Wynwood Village, Dallas, Texas, advised he was on duty on November 20th and 21st, 1963. However, he does not recall giving a check to an employee of Texas Butcher Supply Company, Dallas, Texas. Ayers advised, to the best of his knowledge, only one check is issued at TBSC each month, this being payment for refrigeration equipment. Thomas Ayers reviewed the check stubs for Charlie's Ranch Meat Market in an effort to locate a stub indicating a check was issued to TBSC on or about November 20 or 21, 1963, with negative results. Now, the date that a check is written isn't necessarily the date it was picked up, if someone's coming to pick it up. So it says on or about November 20 or 21, but it seems to me if the check had been written a week earlier, say November 13th, just as an example, that the FBI, especially this FBI, who was thoroughly dishonest in this matter, might not say that was on or about November 20 or 21. And it doesn't look like they tried to determine when the November check was written, or when it was picked up, or when it was mailed, or whatever was normally done. It doesn't clarify anything at all. All it does is make it look as though Ralph Yates is not telling the truth or is incorrect about going there to pick up a check on November 20 or 21. But it's not. It does not represent a good investigation at all, because it doesn't explain how their November check was transmitted to the TBSC. And we already have the story from Yates that he went to pick it up, so a real investigation would find out what happened with this check. Did somebody pick it up? But they don't do that because they're not looking for the truth. And the Texas Butcher Supply Company must know when they were paid by Charlie's Meat Market. They must have records of either receiving a check or depositing a check. But we don't get any of that. All we get is this half-assed FBI report of their half-assed investigation. We don't get documentary evidence of anything, that would be definitive, like a bank statement or something. Now, going back to the Hoover teletype, to the Dallas FBI office, Hoover says to the Dallas FBI office, re-interview Yates with Polygraph, provided he furnishes written waiver of consent in effort to determine Yates' veracity with respect to his alleged conversation with individual identified by Yates as subject being Oswald. So here Hoover is telling the Dallas office to use the lie detector machine if Yates agrees to do so. Yates did agree. He did consent to the lie detector test, and this is the FBI report of that interview. On January 4th, 1964, Ralph Leon Yates was interviewed with the use of the polygraph at the FBI office in Dallas, Texas, by Special Agent C. Ray Hall, with Special Agent Warren C. DeBruys present during the interview. Yates signed a waiver consenting to the interview on December 10th, 1963. Bureau teletype to Dallas, January 2nd, 64, authorized this interview. Well, that's a little weird. It says here that back in December, they asked Yates to sign a waiver consenting to the polygraph interview. And this is before Hoover had sent the teletype, and yet they didn't interview him until after Hoover sent the teletype. During the interview, Yates was asked whether he had deliberately furnished any false information to the FBI, whether he had picked up a hitchhiker along the R.L. Thornton Expressway in November 1963, whether this hitchhiker had a package with him, whether this person told him he had curtain rods in the package, whether this person asked Yates if he knew Jack Rubenstein or Jack Ruby, whether this person showed Yates a photograph of himself holding a rifle, whether this hitchhiker talked about killing the president, whether he let this person out at the intersection of Elm and Houston Streets, and whether he believed this person was Lee Harvey Oswald. No significant emotional responses were recorded by the polygraph when Yates was asked these relevant questions, or control-type questions. Therefore, no conclusion could be reached as to whether Yates was answering questions truthfully. Now, when people are lying on polygraph machines or polygraph examinations, emotional responses usually indicate that they're lying. And they're saying there were no emotional responses. So that would probably indicate that Yates was telling the truth when he answered these questions. But here they say there were no emotional responses when control-type questions were asked either. And in control-type questions, they intentionally elicit lies so they can see how he reacts when he lies. So apparently what they're saying here is that he didn't react to anything. So they can't tell with Yates because he's a particular kind of subject who doesn't put out these emotional responses when he lies. I think that's what they're saying. This is a folder, the cover of a folder that John Armstrong scanned at the National Archives. And one of the things it says on it is 4 polygraph charts. So it seems to be indicating that there are 4 polygraph charts from the polygraph interview of Ralph Yates inside the folder. But in the John Armstrong archives, there are only 2 polygraph charts. So this seems to indicate that the folder actually only had 2 polygraph charts in it from the Yates polygraph examination, even though it says it has 4, implying that 2 of them are missing. And, of course, I don't know how to read polygraph charts, so I won't try to do so. The folder also says that it contains 4 sets of questions. And indeed, apparently, there were 4 sets of questions in the folder, as Armstrong has scanned these 4 sets of handwritten questions, apparently used in the polygraph interview with Ralph Yates. The FBI report of the polygraph interview that I read does list several questions that were asked of Yates, but it does not list all of the questions, which apparently were asked according to the handwritten lists of questions. And there are some handwritten questions which I find to be very interesting, and also interesting that they were not listed in the report. One of these questions, not listed in the report, but which apparently was asked according to the handwritten questions, was, "Did you know Jack Ruby?" But this question in the report is stated as, did this person ask Yates if he knew Jack Ruby? And that's not the same question. In the handwritten questions, it's, did you know Jack Ruby? And in the report, it's, did the person ask you if you knew Jack Ruby? Now, Yates' story, as he told it in his first signed statement, was that the person asked him if he knew Jack Ruby. Never was Yates asked in any of the documents we have, other than this list of questions, whether he actually knew Jack Ruby, and never did he say explicitly that he did or did not know Jack Ruby, according to the documents. This is important to me because in my theory, as I've laid it out here already, Yates did know Jack Ruby and did meet Jack Ruby at the B&B restaurant. So I think it's interesting that they're hiding this question. We were never supposed to see the handwritten questions. We were never supposed to see the report either, but Hoover probably assumed that the reports would have to eventually be released. But he wouldn't expect that the handwritten questions for the polygraph examination would ever be released, and maybe he never even saw them. So I think this is interesting. The FBI is asking Yates whether he knew Jack Ruby. And, of course, I think Yates did know Jack Ruby. And, of course, even though we're given the questions, we're not given any of Yates's answers to any of these questions. We know the questions, but we don't know his answers, which is not very helpful. I mean, if we knew the answers, that would be more helpful. And two more handwritten questions I find to be very interesting are numbers 10 and 11 here. Have you told anyone else anything different from what you told the FBI? And have you told any newspaper reporter that you picked up Lee Harvey Oswald? I don't see why the FBI would even ask these questions unless they're concerned that there's somebody else they have to lean on to make sure that the truth doesn't come out. That is, if Yates told other people about his story, then the FBI would have to find a way to deal with that to make sure those people don't talk either. And I think that's why these questions were asked. And of course, these questions don't appear in the FBI report. According to JFK and the Unspeakable, a book by Jim Douglas, a book which I have not read but which many people speak highly of, during his final January 4 trip to the FBI office, Ralph Yates was accompanied by his wife, Dorothy. He had asked her to come with him. In an interview 42 years later, she told me what happened next to her husband. After he completed his inconclusive lie detector test, she said, the FBI told him he needed to go immediately to Woodlawn Hospital, the Dallas hospital for the mentally ill. He drove there with Dorothy. He was admitted that evening as a psychiatric patient. From that point on, he spent the remaining 11 years of his life as a patient in and out of mental health hospitals. A crucial transition in the psychic health of Ralph Yates seems to have occurred at the FBI office on January 4th, 1964, something the FBI said after Ralph's polygraph test puzzled and disturbed Dorothy. They told me he was telling the truth, according to the polygraph machine, but that basically he had convinced himself that he was telling the truth. So that's how it came out. He strongly believed it, so it came out that way. According to what the FBI told Dorothy Yates, the data that registered on the polygraph machine, as then read in the normal way by the polygraph examiner, showed that Ralph Yates was telling the truth. So apparently, Yates's wife was told that the polygraph indicated that Yates was telling the truth, but it was simply that the FBI found that to be unacceptable. And of course, whether or not Yates was telling the truth, we don't even know what the answers to the questions were, so what does it matter, I suppose? So, that's the polygraph examination. Ralph Yates did make out and sign a second statement. We have two from Ralph Yates, and the second one contradicts some of the things he said in his first statement. But I think we should bear in mind what is said by this document here, scanned by John Armstrong at the National Archives. Apparently it's notes that the FBI made from this January 4th second statement. Ralph Yates interviewed by Special Agent C. Ray Hall and Special Agent Warren C. DeBruys on special assignment from New Orleans. And some of you may know about DeBruys, and, I'm not going to get into DeBruys here. Dallas, Texas, January 4th, 1964, no arrest. Interview began at 11:23 a.m. on 164, and the interview concluded at 2:21 p.m., and then the statement began after the interview concluded. So what this says is that the FBI worked on Yates for 3 hours before he made his second statement. And I think we should keep that in mind when considering the details of his second statement. I, Ralph Leon Yates, make the following statement voluntarily to Warren C. DeBruys and C. Ray Hall, who have identified themselves to me as special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. No threats or promises have been made to me to get me to make this statement. I have been told that I do not have to make a statement, and that I have a right to talk with a lawyer before making any statement. I have been told that any statement I make can be used against me in a court of law. On December 10th, 1963, I furnished a signed statement to C. Ray Hall and Maurice J. White, or maybe Maurice J. Wyatt, special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and on this day I have reread this statement, and Special Agent DeBruys has read it to me, and I now wish to make the following changes. In my statement of December 10, 1963, I mentioned that the hitchhiker had asked me if I knew a Jack Rubenstein, and that he had also said that Jack Rubenstein was more commonly known as Jack Ruby, and that Ruby ran the Carousel Club. I now wish to state that the hitchhiker in my last statement, who I identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, did not mention the name of Ruby, or Rubenstein, but apparently had mentioned the name of Jack. See, this is what I mean by the FBI worked on him. I think they got him to forget the last name that Oswald mentioned, as if that would be any different from Jack anyway. And it was for that reason that I asked him if he was referring to the man that owns Jack Branch Office Lounge. I wish to state now that I cannot positively state that he used the name Ruby or Rubenstein. Also in my statement of December 10th, 1963, I said that the hitchhiker had asked me if I thought that the president could be killed with a gun like the one I mentioned in that statement. This is not entirely accurate. The hitchhiker rather asked me if I thought a man could be shot from up on top of a building or out of a window. That's not much of a change, really, considering he's still identifying the hitchhiker as Oswald. In my statement of December 10th, 1963, I mentioned after I got back from Irving that same day, I told Dempsey Jones, a man that I work with, about the conversation I had with this man. I wish to explain that my conversation with Dempsey was as follows. I mentioned to Dempsey that a coincidence had happened that morning, explaining that I had picked up a hitchhiker who said the same thing that Dempsey and I had talked about previously, namely that a man could be shot from a window from a building top when a man would be coming up from under the Continental Underpass. This is all I can remember about my conversation with Dempsey. Outside of the above changes, my statement of December 10th, 1963 is accurate. Well, I think the only thing significant here really is that he's now saying in this statement that Oswald did not mention the name Rubenstein or Ruby, and I think that's probably the result of being worked on for 3 hours by Warren C. DeBruys. Okay, that takes care of the second statement. And now it's time for Crazy Ralph. Starting with this January 10th, 1964 FBI document, Ralph Yates starts to come off as crazy. During the night of January 8th, 1964, Ralph Leon Yates telephoned Special Agent C. Ray Hall and stated he desired to talk with Special Agent Hall again. During the telephone call, Yates was crying and sounded as if he were emotionally upset. On January 9th, 1964, Yates appeared at the Dallas office and stated he had been extremely upset and nervous about the report he had made to the FBI. I bet that he had picked up a hitchhiker and that he believed to be Lee Harvey Oswald. He said he had become very suspicious of the people he worked with. Everything he previously reported seemed unreal to him, as if he had dreamt it, but he is positive that everything had actually happened just as he had reported. He said that his father had a nervous breakdown when he, Ralph Leon Yates, was a young boy, but so far as he knows, his father was never treated by a doctor or at any institution for this nervous breakdown. His uncle, Charles Yates, has been confined at the Terrell State Hospital, Terrell, Texas, for mental treatment and is presently on leave from that nut house. His grandfather, James Yates, was treated at a mental hospital at Alton or Wood River, Illinois, about 25 or 30 years ago. Insanity runs in the family. Ralph Leon Yates stated, however, that he is sure he is all right. He said that it bothers him a great deal because at one time he lived on Garfield Street in Edwardsville, Illinois, and President Garfield was assassinated. Barney T. White, otherwise known as Barney T. White, who was a great-uncle or some kind of distant relative of Yates, is a printer, and White has done some printing work for Jack Ruby. Yates said that things like this just seem to involve him somehow in something, and he can't figure out what it is. And of course, I've gone over Barney T. White already. And on the same day, Ralph's wife is brought into the craziness. Mrs. Ralph Leon Yates advised that her husband has discussed with her the report he had made to the FBI about picking up a hitchhiker he thought was Lee Harvey Oswald. Mrs. Yates stated that her husband is a very truthful person, and she ordinarily has no reason to doubt anything he tells. She does know he mentioned nothing about this to her until after everything he told that indicated he had picked up Lee Harvey Oswald had appeared in the newspapers and on television. Her husband has been so upset and nervous since the assassination of President Kennedy that she is now concerned about his mental condition. She explained that her husband was abandoned by his mother when he was less than 2 years old. When he was about 10 years old, his father and stepmother moved away and left him to try to find a place to live with relatives, so he has felt rather insecure all his life. Her husband's paternal grandfather, name not known, was in a mental institution in Illinois for some time. His paternal uncle, Charlie Yates, has spent over a year at Terrell State Hospital, Terrell, Texas, and still thinks he is Jesus Christ. And his paternal aunt, Mrs. Gladys Smith, has spent a lot of time at Timberlawn Sanitarium in Dallas, Texas, for treatment of her mental condition. Insanity definitely runs in the family. Mrs. Smith frequently imagines that things have happened to her that never happened, and Mrs. Yates is now fearful that her husband is having the same type of difficulty. Her husband has told her nothing which would indicate that he is deliberately lying about picking up Lee Harvey Oswald as a hitchhiker, and she thinks her husband now really believes he did talk with Oswald, but she is not sure that this happened at all, and thinks it entirely possible her husband is suffering from a hereditary mental condition. So far as she knows, her husband has not been examined by any doctor or treated by any doctor for any mental condition. So says the wife, or so says the FBI, says the wife. And now comes the crazy statement, this FBI document of January 17th. On January 15th, 1964, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Leon Yates appeared at the Dallas office of the FBI. Mr. Yates had a small ladies' overnight case with him, and inside he had several bottles of pills and capsules, which he stated he would like to have analyzed because he thought his doctors were trying to kill him. Interesting. Yates said he was afraid he was losing his mind. These bottles of medicine had been prescribed for him by several doctors over an extended period of time. It was suggested to Yates that he contact his own doctor and seek help at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas, the city-county hospital. Yates stated he had tried to put down on paper all his thoughts about his contact with Lee Harvey Oswald and the death of President Kennedy, and he furnished the following written account. Now, I'm not going to read all this. It's very difficult to read because there's many spelling errors, and it is kind of a disjointed, crazy thinking, it seems to be anyway. But I will stop on one area of interest here to me. Here, as I have underlined, he says, I struggled to make a living. I found myself in a financial state. I lied to the government in to get money and also work. So he thought, wouldn't go to them and tell the truth. President, but I did tell the truth, but they didn't believe me. Now, it's hard, it's treacherous going here, trying to interpret things that Ralph says in this statement, but I imagine this has something to do with how he was being leveraged by Jack Ruby. I struggled to make a living, and I found myself in a financial state. I lied to the government to get money and also work. So he thought, I'm thinking he is Jack Ruby after he had, talking about when he had his discussion with Ruby at the B&B. He thought I wouldn't go to the FBI and tell the truth, but I did tell the truth, but they didn't believe me. So I think Ruby might have been provided with incriminating information about Yates, that he lied to the government because he needed the money, and that perhaps Ruby threatened him with revealing this information or getting the government on his case about it, and he thought that would keep, or hoped that would keep Yates from going to the FBI and telling the truth. But he did go to the FBI and tell the truth. Of course, I'm speculating in my interpretation here, and I do think that Ralph Yates probably really was suffering some kind of a mental problem. So maybe this is meaningless, but I think it's too easy to dismiss everything a crazy person says as meaningless. Usually it does mean something. It's just that it's hard to understand what it means. And I'll put the rest of this statement on the screen, but I'm not going to read it. But I'll put it up so that anybody who wants to stop on the frame that shows one of the pages may read it for himself if he likes, if he's watching on a device where the screen is large enough to read it. On a home computer, a desktop computer, there should be no problem. But on your cell phone, it may be impossible to read. I don't know. I don't view internet videos on a cell phone. And I make them on a desktop computer, and I make it as if my viewers have a desktop computer. But anyway, since these documents are not commonly found around, I thought maybe it would be useful to post them here so that anybody who's interested can stop the video and read it for himself. And apparently, either later, I was going to say later on that same day, but I think it might have been later on a different day, Mrs. Ralph Leon Yates, after her husband had been at the FBI office in Dallas, Texas, she went with her husband to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. After contacting doctors there, Ralph Leon Yates was admitted as a patient and placed in Woodlawn Hospital for observation and psychiatric treatment for a period of 10 days to 2 weeks. And thus begins Ralph Leon Yates' adventure in the mental institutions, one of which he died in when he was 39 years old. Then there's this one, an FBI document. I don't have a date for it. I think it's one of those summary documents. The original report, if there was an original report, I've never seen. But I find this to be relevant. Yates denied any history of mental disturbances or mental treatment. He stated that while he was in the U.S. Air Force, he went to military doctors inasmuch as he was having pains in his back. He said he was interviewed by a psychiatrist about 2 months before being discharged, coincidentally, who told him he thought the pains would disappear after he was discharged from the service. So I think that Yates was known by his military commanders to be a mental case, and that somehow U.S. intelligence came to be aware of this And they decided to use Yates as, I think he was intentionally set up somehow, and I can't say how, I just have to have blind speculation about how they did it. But I think they knew that Yates was a mental case, and they wanted a mental case, because if something goes wrong, they want to be able to portray him as being crazy. And so, since he was a mental case in the U.S. Air Force, government authorities would be aware of that, and if they were looking for a mental case who was living in Dallas, they might be able to find their mark through their military connections. And Yates, I think, was probably singled out somehow to be the, perhaps with the cooperation of Yates' employer, though I couldn't find anything definitive about his employers. That is, I couldn't find that they had a connection to the U.S. government or U.S. intelligence, but I think probably somehow Yates was set up to be the witness who would testify that Oswald carried the 4-foot to 4.5-foot package to the Texas School Book Depository. I think that was the original plan, and that Yates was targeted because they knew he was a kook, and they knew that they could portray him as a kook or push him over the edge or something in order to discredit his testimony if needed. And if it wasn't needed, then he'd be no worse than what's her name? Helen Markham, you know. If Yates hadn't been pushed over the edge, he would have been no worse than Helen Markham, and that would have worked because the shills and dopes believe Helen Markham, so why wouldn't they believe Ralph Yates? So I think this is probably how the conspiracy, or the U.S. intelligence conspiracy, found Yates, because they searched through their military contacts for a nutbag who was living in Dallas. Well, I guess that about does it. But that's about all I can say about Yates. Ralph Yates, 2024.